Women's Law Center. Right now, we're going to give people a few more minutes to get on, and then we'll go ahead and start our webinar. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, and we would like to let you all know that this webinar will be recorded and sent out afterwards. Also, at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions. We can't take questions by phone, but we will be taking questions using the Q&A function on the GoToWebinar services. So if you have any questions, please write them in there, and we'll do our best to answer at the end. So let's get started.
Thank you, Candace. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Chu. I am the Vice President for Strategy and Policy at the National Women's Law Center. Thank you all so much for joining us. We are excited to be with you today to present the findings from our new research project. So I will give a brief synopsis of what brought us here, why we're here, and then I'm going to turn it to our posters and consultants, Tressa Undum, partner at the Perry Undum Project, and also Margie O'Mara, principal at GBA Strategies. So us as a women's movement, we have witnessed historic energy over the last 2 years, from women across the country. From day one of the administration, women have been marching, we have been organizing, we have been calling Congress, we have been running for office, we have been voting, and we have been winning. And the moment and that energy and the historic wins that allow us to capture the House really calls for us to center issues that would help improve the lives of women and girls. But at the same time, it's been a very difficult 2 years, and we've definitely had some tough fights, and we've lost some. And that includes the Kavanaugh nomination. During the Kavanaugh nomination, we had a challenging time at the Law Center, in part because, we were trying to find ways to talk across the issues and to link issues such as abortion and sexual harassment together. So those two things, seeing the momentum of the last 2 years, seeing the historic victory, in the House, but also seeing, some of our tough fights like the Kavanaugh nomination has brought us to this point wherein we thought it would be helpful to get some solid research about how voters view issues and policies around gender equality, and at the same time to start trying to speak more interconnectedly about our issues. And for us, some of the issues that we really work on, we really center at the Law Center, includes sexual harassment, includes abortion, and it includes economic justice. And so we're excited to be working with Perry Undum and GBA Strategies, and they will go over with you the latest findings and research, both in terms of voter support for the issues, as well as research that suggests and maybe help guide us forward on how voters view these issues together, what are the common values that link these issues, and how we might be able to start approaching the issues in a way that resonates with voters. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tressa Undum from Perry Undum.
Thanks, Anna. So Margie and I are both on the phone, and we're going to sort of tag team this this presentation. I'll kick it off here, and I just want to speak quickly to the momentum that Anna was talking about, which we've seen. Obviously, we've all seen it, and we've seen it in the polling data as well, in terms of women fired up and more support for gender equality and a number of different things over the last couple of years. So we are in this new movement, quote unquote, women's movement, but one thing I just want to call out, or just a kudos to the Law Center, because despite the fact that we're in this huge moment in time, there's a lack of data and research, both among women and among progressives, to sort of harness this movement, and then also around communications and how do we talk about all these issues that disproportionately affect women. And so I think it's a really great work that the Law Center did, and we're happy to be a part of it. So let's go to the first slide. Let me just give you a sense of the methods here and what we did. So we moved actually really quickly after Kavanaugh. It was in December. We started with qualitative research. We did 3 online remesh sessions, which is among 175 voters across the country. Remesh is sort of like an online, sort of like a big online focus group that uses AI for some ratings and analysis I won't get into, but think of it as 3 big focus groups. One was among Democrats of color, one was among Democrats with a mix of race and ethnicity, and one was among moderate Republicans. We screened out in that qualitative research people who want all abortions illegal, and I think we also screened out people who strongly support the president's immigration policy. So pretty much moderates, pretty much almost all Democrats qualified, and in those discussions, we really looked at these 3 big areas: reproductive rights, health, access, justice, sexual harassment and assault, and economic opportunities for women. And we got a lot of detailed, which I'll get into, a lot of detailed feedback on how people are thinking about these 3 different issues and the values that intersect all 3 and that kind of thing. So we did that, and then we moved quickly to a national survey. This was fielded in the beginning of January among 2,000 registered voters. We used YouGov for this, and we oversampled voters of color. So 1,200 voters were of color, equally divided between Black, Latinx, and API voters. And the purpose of this survey, it had many purposes. We're going to share with you all the results, but we wanted to get a sense of what are voters' priorities, what are their support and opposition for a number of different policies that disproportionately affect women, and we wanted those data to help inform policymakers. And then we had the opportunity to test some of the value stuff we learned in the qualitative, and we also tested a few messages in the survey. So it's sort of a hodgepodge of what we use the quantitative for, but we'll go through those. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about, going to give you the context of sort of the mood of the country, where the country is right now. Margie's going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about where are we right now in terms of views toward Me Too, gender, women, equality. We'll talk about priorities for Congress from the survey, specific policies. Margie will go through those. I'll talk about insights into values, and then we'll wrap up with sort of thinking about messaging around these issues and what we learned. So Margie, do you want to take mood of the country here?
Sure. Excuse me. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are. This is Margie O'Mara with GBA. Oh, we added an O since we finalized this presentation. But so if you go on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the mood of the country. And once again, I want to reiterate what Tressa said and what Anna said. Look, there are a lot of things in these data that I think are very strong and positive and reinforce the groundswell of support women candidates, women voters, and women's issues have seen in the last 2 years. At the same time, I want to caution against sort of believing our own, that was sort of the line, don't believe your own best scenario. So we don't want to be too optimistic on some of these things and make sure we're doing a gut check or a data check, depending on what district or state or population you're dealing with. But let's go through here some of the big picture data. Overall, this is something that's true no matter how we measure or capture mood of the country. People feel pessimistic. I haven't seen a poll that doesn't show that people feel pretty worried about where the country is going. It's true across party lines, although obviously there's a partisan piece here where Republicans feel more optimistic about where the country's going because they feel obviously better about the president than do Democrats. But if you ask this question in other ways about do you feel we're divided and such, or what's the most important issue? Sometimes people will say government dysfunction higher than things like the economy. So the one thing that really unites us right now is the sense that we're divided. And so that's true in all kinds of public data. Now, if you could go to the next slide, please. And then there's some, public polling about Tressa, you were going to do the Me Too section, or do you want me to do this? Sorry, I thought.
Sure, I'll jump in.
Yes.
I'll jump in and throw it back to you. So, so we've done a couple big surveys right after the presidential election. In December 2016, we did a big survey on where are voters on gender, on equality, on power, that we assessed sort of the impact of Trump's Access Hollywood tapes, all of that. Then a year later, 2017, right after the first wave of Me Too stories, we did another survey where we tracked data. And then a year after that, December of last year, so a few months ago, we again did a big survey that's going to be released in the next week or two. And that assessed all the issues around Kavanaugh and the hearings and what was the implications of all of that. But we also tracked data. So we have 3 years of tracking data on issues toward women. So let me just give you a sense of where we are. 75% of voters think sexism is a big or somewhat of a problem. 8 in 10 voters say men have more positions of power in society than women. 72% of voters say it's important that Congress work on promoting gender equality. On the next slide, the reason I bring up these tracking polls is just to emphasize, Me Too movement is a big deal. I know we all know this, but from 2016 to 2017, we saw really big changes that we don't typically see in polling. So from 2016 to 2017, sexism as a big problem went up 14 points. agreeing that the country would be better off with more women in office went from 52% right after the presidential election to 69% a year later. Have you talked with friends and family members about issues related to women's equality in the past year? 49% in 2016, up to 72%, 27% increase. And right after the presidential election, do men have more positions in power? Do women have more positions, or is it equal? 65% said men. A year later, 87%. So on the next slide. So a lot is happening. It's a chaotic time in basically every way, including public opinion and including shifts. Just a sense of where are we right now. So again, this hasn't been released yet, but the big picture, what we're seeing on all of these things, the Kavanaugh events and the hearings, one of the main things it did is made people think about men having more power in government, and that had some consequences in the midterms. The events around the hearing actually sent Republican men backwards in terms of, and possibly in addition to Kavanaugh, MeToo also might have had an effect there, but they're more likely to have hostile sexist views. They're less likely to believe women. A number of measures. They sort of went backwards pre-2017, pre-2016. Others, however, kind of moved forward on gender equality. So that's sort of where we are. All of these things are still important, or voters still say they're important in our surveys. The next slide, I think I'm going to shift it over to Margie again to talk about issue priorities.
Yes, so issue priorities. So this, I think, is something that I think makes a lot of sense given what we know about the issue climate. It's true with a lot of issues. I mean, this is a challenge Democrats in progressive space in that we have, I guess, or an opportunity at the same time. There are so many issues where voters are on our side, yet, we're still a divided country. So the challenge is to make sure we're wrapping it up in a frame that people feel that they are a part of too, that they feel included in what Democrats are offering. But the issue priority is very much favors our position, and it favors issues that focus on women. So if you could turn on to go to the next slide, please. We asked about a variety of specific issues here. How there are three core issues that we asked, both individually and then kind of as a group relative to other priorities. And you can see, however we ask about it, that there's a real value here. So this first one is working on and protecting reproductive rights. So it actually focuses on the side or the pole of the policy. Sometimes some of these questions will have things like abortion or immigration and not specify what position specifically. Not that that's an incorrect question, just a different kind of question. So here we very specifically say, how important do you think it is for Congress to protect reproductive rights? And a majority say it's extremely, very, or somewhat important. Republican men are going to be lower on this list. That's not a surprise, but even a majority of Republican men say, it should be at least somewhat important, with clear high numbers of Democrats and in communities of color, suburban women, independent women, for sure. Next slide, please. And then specifically about Roe v. Wade, now there's no other Supreme Court decision that has the same kind of notoriety as Roe v. Wade. It's something that was part of when we did polling, not this poll, but previous polling for other organizations in advance of the Kavanaugh pick, for when there was a Supreme Court opening and when there was a vacancy. The protecting Roe v. Wade was a clear priority for voters then. And now that you see a lot of voters feeling and sensing that abortion rights are under threat, more than I think we've seen in previous years, you see these numbers here. They really reinforce the fact that the Republican and the rights trajectory is really very divergent with where voters are, because the majority say we should not overturn Roe v. Wade. And I know that there are folks who kind of want to split the difference here or do some hair splitting and say, well, we can, we don't have to overturn Roe v. Wade. We can just, gut it in a way that allows states to do X, Y, and Z. This question doesn't go into that. Still, the sense is almost 3/4 say we should not overturn Roe v. Wade. Even Republicans, even people who voted for a Republican member of Congress, still are at best divided on this. So it's not a priority for folks. They don't want to see it overturned. And the next slide. And it's more motivating now for Democrats than for Republicans. And this, again, I think is a new phase or a new thing that we're seeing, a new trend that we're seeing, that things like the Supreme Court battles and abortion being more motivating for Democrats than they are for Republicans. That's recent, again, because there is a sense among Democrats that these rights are under threat. So you see more Democrats who say it's important to me to I can't vote for a candidate who does not share my views on abortion. More Democrats say that than Republicans. Okay, and the next slide. Some of the other issues we asked about is improving economic opportunities for women and families. Now, we don't specify what that means. It's just the priority. It's the goal of it. And that too is considered a priority across the board. Again, Republican men are going to be lower there than these other groups, but still majorities across all these other audiences say this is something that's important. Look at that big difference between Republican women and Republican men. I mean, it's notable. I mean, Republican women are an opportunity for progressives who are looking to build consensus on issues that have bipartisan support. Republican women are really a very natural place to go, since they face a lot of the same challenges that women across the board do, across party lines. These issues don't always have to be partisan or have to be framed in a partisan way. So improving economic opportunities, yes, that can mean different things to different people, but it's a priority nonetheless for lots of folks. Next slide, please. And then the last one is preventing sexual harassment and assault. So that's something that Congress can work on. It's also considered a priority. Not as much of a difference between Republican men and Republican women. A large percentage of Democrats, for sure, saying this. This is an issue, that I've heard some, I've seen in some focus groups and in some other quantitative data. There are some, concern that people can have, particularly women can have, seemingly divergent or views at odds about assault and Me Too and such at the same time, that they can say feel that it's good for women to be able to come forward and speak about these issues, that we should be holding people accountable. At the same time, some of these same women can also think, well, maybe there are some instances where where Me Too goes too far. That's a phrase you hear sometimes in qualitative. So people can have those different kinds of seemingly at odds views simultaneously. The fact that this is more partisan than other questions, I think reflects that. Next slide, please. So then we had a variety of other different kinds of policies here. And we see that, again, these three areas receive a lot of broad support across all kinds of different demographic audiences. Let's go on to the next slide. So remember, before we had like these three buckets of policies, priorities. Now we have all kinds of different specific priorities. And these too are all overwhelmingly support. Look how broad the support is here, 90, 87, 84. These are high numbers here. The strong support is in majority. The total support is almost unanimous. And there are all kinds of different policies here, requiring employers to take steps to prevent harassment on the job, making sure employers can't prevent a victim of harassment from talking about his or her experience, preventing employers from changing work hours at the last minute, which is important in terms of, for a lot of part-time and hourly wage workers, making sure women can't be fired or discriminated against because of their use of abortion, birth control, abortion, sex outside of marriage, et cetera, et cetera. And this list is, a really a powerful list of progressive policies. They are not framed in a partisan way. They simply state what the policy is. There's no coded language or cue here to let people know what jersey they should wear when they're listening to this, the blue or the red jersey. And so there's really widespread support for all of them. Next slide, please. A little bit lower down the list, but certainly still supported. Increase in minimum wage, which, it has a kind of partisan cue to some folks. So it's seen as, a blue side versus red side. Make sure women don't face discrimination in healthcare, like being refused care for an abortion. It's very, zeroes in on abortion, as opposed to some of the other proposals that had abortion and a list with other items. Okay, next slide, please. And then you can look at by demographic audiences, like, Democrats like all of them, independents like almost all of them. Republicans, there's just a little bit of, slightly lower support among Republicans for some of these items that are more about abortion or minimum wage that sound progressive to the ear of some Republicans. But still, I think that we should, this is a glass half full or glass half empty situation, and I think these numbers are strong. Next slide, please. And especially, same thing when we ask about strong support, but last slide was total support. This slide is strong support. You see a similar pattern. We shouldn't expect everybody that we talk to strongly support every policy that we ask. Is the fact that there are a third to half of Republicans who strongly support these is an opportunity. Again, it is a more moderate Republican electorate than what is representing these folks, these voters in Washington. Next slide, please. Differences by race and ethnicity here, where white voters are less supportive of these proposals than whether Black, Latinx, or API voters. It's true in almost every item that we asked here, where majorities of these groups support all the proposals that we asked for. AAPI, a little bit more. There are some proposals that don't have quite a majority support. White voters are a little bit lower on a few of these, because white voters are going to be more Republican leaning than other communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to take it back to Tressa.
Great, thanks, Margie. So a lot of support behind those issues, and definitely heed Margie's earlier warning that this is sort of in a context, this is in a vacuum. This is just sort of at the core concept level. Do people support it? They do. So I'm going to take it back to the qualitative research we began with to sort of delve into why do people support these policy issues. Why is preventing sexual harassment important, protecting reproductive rights and economic opportunity for women? So let's go to the next slide. So what are in these online focus groups we did, we took each of these three buckets: reproductive rights, economic opportunity, and sexual harassment, and we asked questions on a number of different dimensions for each of those. For voters, we asked, what is this issue really about for you fundamentally? Why in America is it important? Is this issue important that we work on this? What's the impact of women when they don't have economic opportunities or when they don't have reproductive rights? What's the impact of men? What's the impact on society? Why is this issue important? All different kinds of questions to get at, again, just to get at each of these issues in a number of different ways, and to sort of, so that we could call out what are the core values and concepts within each of these buckets, and across each issue as well. And the next slide. So please, thank you. In the qualitative research, so what we found is here are the values under each bucket: reproductive health, access, rights. People talked about fundamentally, this is about rights. It's about control. It's often about the right to control my body. It's about choice, and it's about freedom. Sexual harassment and assault And it kind of went in these orders: safety, equality, freedom, rights, dignity. Economic security, it was about equality, equal rights, opportunity, freedom, empowerment. And then when we looked at across all of these three issues, it was what voters saw connecting across all three: equality, rights, freedom, opportunity, control, power / oppression, and the negative. And by the way, we asked about all different kinds of values. We asked about, is it about health? Is it about liberty, fairness, justice, equity, self-determination? A bunch of different values. It was these that came up again and again by participants. Next slide, please. So then in the survey, we wanted to kind of do a check on ourselves. Those values were strong in the qualitative. In the survey, we asked, which is it, when you think about these issues, what is each of these about for you personally? And we heard similar things. So around protecting reproductive rights and access, it's about rights, number one, freedom, safety, and then on down from there. Women of color also more likely to connect to reproductive rights and access to respect, a little bit more likely than white voters. Democrats and Black voters more likely to connect reproductive rights to equality than other voters. Preventing sexual harassment and assault, it's about safety, respect, and then down from there. Interestingly, women were a little bit more likely than men to connect this issue to safety, which is bizarrely unfortunate. Improving economic opportunities for women, equality, then opportunity, and down from there. The next slide. And then we said, okay, now think about these three issues together: protecting reproductive rights, sexual harassment, economic opportunities. What are these really about in our country? And again, the top ones: equality, rights, respect, freedom, and pretty much across the board. As I mentioned, rights is a little bit more top for Black voters, Latinx, API voters than white voters. But it's essentially these four across groups that are sort of the core values that they see connected across the issue areas. The next slide. So based on the qualitative, we wanted to take the opportunity in the survey. And again, we moved really quickly. We wrote that questionnaire in about 3 days. But we wanted to take the opportunity to test this narrative around these core values. So this survey was, people took this online so they could read this survey and they could click on words or phrases that they really strongly agree with. So these highlighted words, the darker they are, the more people clicked on them as really strongly standing out, resonating with them. So this is what we presented to people. Our country is based on ideas. By the way, and all of this language came straight from the focus group. So these were people's, their own language that we sort of put together and into this statement. So our country is based on ideas of equality, freedom, individual rights, and opportunity. These are our basic principles and what set us apart. When our rights to control our own bodies and lives are restricted, we lose what makes our country special. When some people have freedom and opportunity and others do not, our society becomes even more divided. As Margie said, that's a key thing that the division unites us right now. We pride ourselves on equal rights, freedom, and opportunity, and it's time to back it up. That means equal rights for women under the law. It means each of us has the freedom to make our own decisions, including on abortion. It means being safe in our own bodies and free from harassment and violence. It means equal opportunities to be economically secure, live a good quality life. When women have full equality, we can provide for our families with dignity, give our children a better chance. Equality means safer workplaces, healthier families, stronger communities, better economy. By joining together, we can all benefit and strive to a more peaceful and prosperous society. Okay, so they read that. You can see sort of those core values were the phrases and language that people were most likely to strongly agree with. Women of color especially were more likely to highlight. Some people have freedom and opportunity and others do not, as well as the rights to control our own bodies and lives, as well as women generally. So they got this statement. They clicked any words or phrases or language they really agree with. And then on the next slide, we asked them some questions. One question we asked was, first of all, do you agree or disagree with this statement? 70% agree, 24% disagree. That 24% who disagrees is essentially that 25% of voters who want Roe v. Wade overturned. So it's sort of those really, really strong anti-abortion voters who disagreed. Not surprisingly, communities of color, which is sort of this core progressive base, much more likely to agree and more likely to strongly agree. Democrat men and women, just as equally likely. And in all the research we've done, what is sort of the most interesting, especially focus groups, the most interesting groups I've done in the last couple of years are among Democrat men, because they're really getting it. I mean, they're woke, or they're woke adjacent. It's really incredible. Even on issues like abortion, even on issues of gender equality, even on issues of, Medicaid, helping women, Democrat men are, just as strong as Democrat women. So that's kind of new. Independent women also more likely to agree with this statement. Let's go to the next one. That we asked, let's say the statement came from your state or federal lawmaker, would you be more or less likely to support that person? So overall, 32-point difference. 58% say they're more likely to support a lawmaker if they had heard the statement, 26% less likely. And you can see that difference, that positive difference across nearly all groups except Republican men who are less likely to support somebody after hearing that statement. And again, not a surprise, especially after we're seeing Republican men sort of reverting in their views around women and gender. So let's go to the next slide. So a couple insights on messaging. Again, this wasn't, this was more just an opportunity. We have room in the survey. We're going to have a head-to-head, or we have a men's rights message on sexual harassment, and then we're going to test some responses to this men's rights. So this men's rights, here's the message. So people got, which statement do you agree with more? First one, which is this: sexual harassment is a problem, but not just for women. It's also becoming a bigger problem for men who may be falsely accused of harassment. We need to hit the pause button, make sure our fathers, sons, brothers are not harmed by the WMeToo movement. It's important to catch sexual predators, but most men are decent. Too many people can just accuse somebody, whether or not they did anything wrong. It's too easy to shatter a man's life right now. Men are becoming victims of this movement. And on the next slide, respondents randomly got one of three responses to that message. So one, we just read this one on equality. And again, this came from the qualitative, what people said in the qualitative. Sexual harassment hurts everyone. At the core, sexual harassment is about power and using it to control other people, and ending it is about ensuring equality and opportunity for everyone. We should keep fighting for equality so that women and girls can come forward to challenge harassment, not be punished for doing so. Less harassment benefits men too. They can work in a safer, more productive environment based on respect. At the end of the day, we have a right to be safe, free, and equal at school and work. All right, so a third of the sample got this equality response. A third got a sample, essentially the same message, except it emphasized dignity and respect. So ending it is about going to work and school with safety, dignity, and respect. At the end of the day, we all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. And then the third one centered equal opportunity, equal economic opportunity. So it can push victims out of schools, jobs, careers, block people from moving up. We all have the right to equal opportunities to earn a living and pursue our goals. So on the next slide, how did these three messages do in response to that men's rights message? The equality, 55% of respondents say they agree more with that equality message. 45% agree more with that men's rights message. So this again speaks to Margie's caution about, yes, voters tend to be on the progressive side of things. They really value sexual, preventing sexual harassment and assault. But you can see in a message like this, okay, that men's rights message, that has power when you have 45% of respondents choosing that and just 55% of the other. So that one got the most, and again, it's not these aren't big differences. 10-point margin, the equal opportunities, a 7-point margin, dignity and respect did least well, which is a 4-point margin. So 48% agree with the men's rights versus 52%. By the way, when we ask people, at the core, what do you think sexual harassment I don't have it right offhand, but people do connect dignity and respect really closely with sexual harassment and a reason to improve the environment in terms of sexual harassment and assault. They do connect it to that. But on the next slide, when we looked at the crosstabs on these messaging, on these messages, the dignity and respect actually did less well among some core audiences, such as Black voters. So among Black voters, that equality, and these are big margins of error. So, but some of these are some pretty big differences. But among Black voters, there's a 44-point margin between saying I agree more with the equality response than the men's rights message. 3-point margin on the equal opportunities, only 16-point margin on dignity and respect. Same with college educated, and even among Republican voters, the margin is 26 point, is lowest for them agreeing with the men's rights, is lowest when they hear an equality response versus economic opportunities or dignity and respect. So the next slide. So we asked one question and we split samples. So half the sample got, to make life better for everyone, we need to make sure all women, no matter our race or background, have the rights and freedoms to control their own bodies and lives, be safe at school and work, and have equal opportunities. And then half the sample got, and so half we made specific reference to race and background. The other one we just said women. So we wanted to see, is there any impact in discussing race? And on the next slide, there is no difference essentially overall. So the blue are people who got the statement that says no matter our race or background. The yellow is women. So majorities agree with the statement that includes race. The only thing we found is in some of the crosstabs, suburban women, they're a little bit less likely to agree with the statement that references race or background. Same with Republicans. Probably not a shock, but overall they still agree with it. So it's not like discussing race overall is the same, and even among these groups, while it does less well than just talking about women, majority still agree with that statement. Let's go to the next slide. So again, we had this opportunity where we presented respondents with the DEMOS. Probably people are familiar with this DEMOS race class narrative. And then we compared that statement. We split sampled again 3 times, compared it with a DEMOS narrative that highlights some gender issues, and then adapted some of the language with a message that is also around race, class, gender, and economics. So the DEMOS, no matter where we come from or what our color, we all work hard for our families, but today certain politicians and their greedy lobbyists hurt everyone by handing kickbacks to the rich, defunding our schools, threatening our seniors, cuts to Medicare and Social Security. They turn around and point the finger at poor families. We need to join together with people from all walks of life to fight for our future, just like when we want better wages, safer workplaces, blah, blah, blah. So we essentially replicated that almost verbatim, but we included in this middle message, restricting our rights to control our lives, cutting funds for programs that help low-income people, mostly women. We added single mothers in there, and then we added access to birth control. So just by lifting up, elevating a little bit the gender angle, what is that? How do people respond to that versus just the traditional race class narrative? And then we presented a message just on through the economic lens. Too many hardworking people in low-wage jobs, the majority of whom are disproportionately women of color, unfair pay. We need to ensure that we all have equal opportunities to jobs and a stable schedule. Every person, no matter their race or gender, should have the chance to do their job. Okay, so on the next slide, here are the results. Essentially, not a whole lot of differences here. Between the DEMOS race class and then the adapted DEMOS race class narrative with a gender, essentially the same. With the economic message, a little bit higher, you add those two up strongly and some agree, and you get a little bit higher. On the next slide, when we looked at some of the crosstabs between those 3 messages, there were a few differences. So when we included in the demos language, infused it with some of the gender language and including birth control and pointing the fingers at single mothers, blah, blah, blah. That works a little bit better than just the general demos message among women, among people of reproductive age, and college educated women of reproductive age a little bit more. That economic message, however, does better by pretty big, you can see about 15 points or more across these demographic groups. The traditional demos message works better than both of these among older adults and Republicans. All right, let's go to the next slide. So we also had the room in the survey where we asked, in your own view, is access to abortion an important part of, and again, we split sampled this, half the sample got women's rights, half got women's equality. And we wanted to test a difference here. I think there are some groups who want to make the connection of access to abortion and rights a connection to gender equality, and we found that's a little bit, it's just a harder connection for people to make. They do connect it, number one, to women's rights. That's a very clear and direct connection. So this came after that narrative where people, the narrative around equality, opportunity, freedom, controlling our own lives, including abortion. So caution here. But the fact that women's rights, essentially, they see abortion equally as important as women's rights as to women's equality is, if we ask this question on a survey without that narrative, I don't know that we'd see the same. I think we might see a little bit more leaning toward women's rights, but the fact that it's equal does give, I think that does suggest there are openings for making abortion, access to abortion, a larger issue about equality. And the next slide. Do you agree or disagree equal rights for women include access to, here we are just comparing safe and legal abortion to reproductive health care. Not a lot of difference here. In effect, and strongly agree, 48% say reproductive health care, 45% say yes, strongly agree, abortion is part of equal rights for women. 60 overall agree with abortion, 71% reproductive health. A third disagree, and that you'll see that third throughout almost any accurate question on abortion. So the next slide. Okay, so I think we're just going to wrap up here. Margie, feel free to jump in too for your thoughts. On the next slide, so this research is kind of going far and wide. We're presenting it to you all, a bunch of different groups. We didn't really expect that, honestly, because we were trying to do so many things with the qualitative and then with the survey. But with the qualitative, I think one of the things when you're thinking about messaging on these issues, and I think we're all used to and recognize that we message in silos and everything happens in silos. So I think this research gives us a little bit of grounding in this chaotic time of what are those core values that voters are feeling and thinking and connecting right now to each of these issues and across all three. So generally, it's what we're finding is it's equality, it's rights, it's respect, it's freedom, it's control and power. And I'll let Margie talk about control and power. When in the research we've done on, I'd say half the country, control is a pretty, control and power right now are pretty dominant undercurrents among Democrats. Among the rest of the country, not so true. And I think, Margie, you've tested sort of that direct language and messaging, right? And it has found that when you directly, explicitly cite control or power, it doesn't do as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've poked at it in focus groups. We've tried it a little bit in quantitative. I just feel like it's my sense, given that it doesn't seem to work as well and stuff that we've seen, and that in some of the testing in this poll that Me Too was sort of balanced, sort of divided. It was like a divided point, I think suggests to me that phrasing around power, sounds strident for people who are not, part of the feminist family. And it's not a commentary on what I think is the underlying cause of men's, rape adjacent behavior. It's how does it sound to voters? And I want to make sure that we are including as many people into this debate and feeling like they can be, that this doesn't have to be a divisive issue. And I feel like phrases like power and control put people in a defensive crouch in terms of what we're talking about. So that's my worry about the phrase power, and that I haven't seen it, really, bubble up in testing aside from, core Democratic audiences.
Yep. Let's go to the next slide. So just a few things as you consider considerations around communications. Don't be afraid to name abortion. In that narrative statement we tested where we explicitly said, including abortion, twice as many people clicked on including abortion, that phrase, as something they strongly agreed with than those who clicked on and strongly disagreed with. I don't think it's something you need to hide from. The race class language works in conjunction with gender on these issues. Again, don't be afraid to use it. I think it's good to use it. I think, and Margie, see if you agree, I feel like, when we test those broad values, or when we test like really strong, when we test values-based messaging, it tends to do fairly well. But in this environment, and I honestly, I feel like it's changing even in the past few months, but in this environment where we're in this era of fake news, and by the way, it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats too, who, I need to see NPR, BBC, Washington Post, New York Times. No one just trusts, any messages they hear anymore. So I think it's important to be specific, to talk about specific policies, and sort of to get more in the weeds than maybe in prior years. On the last two slides, and then Margie, tell me if I missed anything. And I think Anna's going to share this, the Law Center is going to share this. I'm not going to go through these details, but because we got such rich data from the qualitative research, these are in each of these three buckets, just a summary of what, these 175 voters were thinking, why this issue is important, what came up the most, why the issue disproportionately affects women of color. You can see what people thought there, why the problem exists. So if you think about, if you're messaging on, why is this issue important? Why is it a problem? On the next slide, what are the effects of the problem? What are the effects of a solution? Protecting our rights, preventing sexual harassment, improving economic opportunities. This is not the language you use necessarily, but it's sort of a crib sheet for, okay, how do regular people, what did they think of when we asked them this question? So on that note, I think Margie, if I missed anything, or turn it back to Anna.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the chatter. Someone has asked if we will be sending the PowerPoint, and we will be sending the PowerPoint and a recording of the webinar after.
Give it a few minutes. If there are any questions, please feel free to send it in the question option in the tool deck or in the webinar tool. Okay. Well, it seems that Tressa and Margie did a fantastic job at providing a very clear presentation. And so let's conclude this webinar and wrap up. I want to thank Tressa and Margie for their time. Thank you so much for doing this project, with us. It's been an absolute joy. And thank you all for listening in today. We hope that this was helpful to you. Please let us know if you have any questions at all, if you would like to dive deeper into the data. We did a lot of oversampling, and so we'll have a wealth of cross-section of data that we can share with you. But thank you all again for joining us today. Thank you, Margie, and thank you, Tressa.
Thank you all.
And thank you to Candace for helping put this all together for us. Thank you all.
Thanks.